I just wanted to say that discovering your ranger stories has inspired me to share my own ranger stories and personal experiences while on the job. Being a park ranger is never easy. We have a lot of stuff to deal with on a day to day basis, believe it or not. And every year, we have the same reoccurring problems. The rangers are trying to keep the crowds down and animals safe. The problem is, we have a very small park at which we work, and this is adjacent to a much larger park. The large park has no fences between the two, and our park gets, on average, a few hundred people per day entering. The other park had thousands. The large park has a 4th-mile wide road running through it. When a bear is on one side of the road, the park is on the other, and the bear has to run across the road to travel between parks. And because of this is a place where people often stop, since there is bear sightings often. The bear will often stop and try to get into the car sometimes, or try to figure out why people are not coming over to feed them. They can be quite a nuisance, actually. Sometimes, bears will even walk up to people's cars, look inside, and sometimes even attack people. The problem is that bears are getting now more used to people in this area more than ever. It thinks it's a person itself, and bears will get bolder and bolder. And soon, we're going to have a lot more attacks. This particular bear in question is getting very bold, and is kind of worrying me. It will want more. This is how bears will get into cars and attack somebody if given the chance. But believe it or not, this stuff happens far more often than you could ever imagine. We have stuff that happens that many people actually don't know about, which is why I'm writing to you. Things that even I am reluctant to share. I'm worried about repercussions coming back to me, but I guess it's best I tell these stories. There's been some very strange things happening in the parks around here for quite some time now. One of my colleagues seeing strange figures moving in and out of the trees, nearly spooking him. One time, he saw a figure that kind of looked like a man, but was moving very quickly, weaving in and out of the trees in a way that was not natural. He also mentions that this figure would disappear and reappear in different positions. Being very scared by this, and at one point, almost fainted. They finally decided enough was enough and got away. This ranger friend of mine also told me that he had a group of people on tour and was following the group behind them. As they were walking through a group of trees, he saw something move in the corner of his eye. He turned around and saw what he described to me as a tall, white, skinny figure coming towards him. Now, this figure was moving very quickly. He turned around and ran in the other direction. Later on in the day, he was out in the field, and he saw a different figure moving around. He turned and looked, and it appeared to be a man, but it was actually a very strange-looking creature. Being very scared by all of this, he decided to just try and forget about it, ignore it, continue with his work. He didn't want to tell anybody because he was afraid of it affecting his career. One night, this same ranger friend was working in the dark and saw another creature running towards him. He described it as kind of looking like a bear, but very strange looking, at least built the same as a bear. Although he couldn't see it clearly, he could see it that it was very dark. He kept walking and it kept running. He was so scared that he ran all the way back to the park office, locking the door behind him, terrified and completely shaking. This poor ranger, he's much newer to the game than any of us. Another time, this different park ranger friend of mine was talking to a woman at the park. The woman told her that she had a friend who had been out in the field one night and was out there with his dog. The man and his dog were walking around, and this man's dog begins barking. So the man looked up in the trees, and he said he saw a creature that looked like a monkey. The man told him, "I'm not crazy. There's a monkey up in the tree." The man stopped and looked up at the thing and noticed that the monkey whatever it was trying to get down. He said this monkey was trying to do it in a very weird way, the same way a human would. He said now he was very scared by this, ran back to his car, and never went back to that park again. Yet another time, another park ranger friend was talking to a woman who was hiking with her daughter. She was walking along and saw a big, large dog run towards her. It was kind of jumping and running, and it was very dark. She could only see it faintly. She said as it got closer, it began acting very hostile, growling and barking. She said it was kind of coming straight at her, and she was very scared. She was also young and inexperienced, so she kept trying to walk and ignore it. All of a sudden, this dog turned around and ran off. She described it to me as a large black wolf, easily double or triple the size of wolves and how big they should be. And it also had glowing red eyes. She was petrified. When her and her mother got back to the car, the woman noticed that her daughter's boots were covered in a thick, dark substance. She took them home to clean them, and when she washed the boots, some of the substance would not get off their boots, and it even kind of eroded part of the boot away, scaring them badly. Yet another time, a friend was out in the park one night and saw something large moving in the trees. He gets a bit closer and sees a creature running away from him. He described it as canine or dogman-like. It ran away, but he got the feeling that before he had spotted it, this creature had been watching him the entire time. He said it looked like part dog and part man, a very strange-looking being. It kind of reminded him of a werewolf. It was disturbing. He said this thing was running away from him, but was running on two legs like a man. It had a torso, very long, short legs, and it was very fast. He said it ran off and disappeared into the trees. He never saw it again. There's been other strange occurrences, like people going missing under very bizarre circumstances. This other friend of mine had a friend who had disappeared personally. The man was on a camping trip with his family, and he decided to go off into his own in the forest. He was never seen again after that. When they tried to find him, they only found pieces of him, like he was torn into bits by something very large. A bear would have ate him, and this did not look like the kill of any known animal we've ever seen. You see, he wasn't even consumed, just torn into pieces. Of course, it was written off as a bear attack, but after seeing photos of this crime scene and his remains, I'm telling you, it wasn't a bear at all. There were some pretty disturbing circumstances surrounding that entire case, too. One of the more disturbing things I've seen, being a park ranger, is finding strange things far out in the middle of the woods. The one time, we found 19 dead cats, all strung high up in this large oak tree. They had all been dead for days, but no clear signs of how any of them were killed or how they were put up in this tree. They didn't seem like scraggly stray cats either. These were all well-groomed, well-fed, well-maintained animals. They were just all dead, appearing to have died or be killed at the same time. There was never a rhyme or reason to finding their bodies like that. And, honestly, I can't explain why I saw what I saw, but there are things here that go beyond our understanding. Another time, we found a dead deer with its head cut off on the side of the road, about 2 miles away from a smaller military base. Then, we began finding more and more of them. 10, 20, even 30 or more, just dead doe, lying on the ground, all over, all decapitated. It appeared as if their heads had been cleaved right off their bodies. The heads, of course, were nowhere to be found. It's like someone or something just went around killing them and taking their heads. The bodies were all fresh, too. Not like they had been there for days. I don't know what happened. It scared me. One more thing that I've witnessed in that park is the strangest thing of all. I'm not sure if I should even say it, but I will. Years ago, I saw what I think was a ghost. At the time, I was a much younger ranger and hadn't seen or heard anything like this. I was out on a night patrol in the woods and came upon an old wooden dilapidated cabin. It was still locked up though, but it sounded like somebody was yelling for help on the inside, so I kept yelling back just to see if they needed help. I just figured at the time that some poor lonely camper had climbed themselves in this small structure for protection, and they were obviously hurt. Then, I hear a loud creak and a bang from the inside. I could have sworn I heard a voice, but I couldn't make out what was said. I couldn't go inside because of the lock on the door. Then, I see this white apparition start coming out of the house that was shaped like a white human silhouette. It started running at me, and I was scared. I almost fell out of my truck as it came running at me. It definitely seemed like it was trying to get to me, and I couldn't tell if it was a ghost or what it was, but it was big, tall, and a white ghost-like thing. I got out of there as fast as I could. I don't ever want to see that thing again. This is a true story. You see, my dad was a forest ranger in the mountains of California. He passed away 2 years ago, so it makes sense that I share his tale. My brother and I decided to go up into the mountains to spread his ashes. We stayed up at a cabin up there and that my dad used to take us when we were young. It's a really secluded place, next to a river and a lot of forest. We've been up there for about a week at this point, and one night, we were sleeping. I woke up to a very strange noise. I woke up and saw a very dark shadow walking around just outside the cabin. I thought that my brother was sleepwalking, so I didn't bother to wake him up. I just decided to watch the shadow, and after a while, the shadow began to turn towards the window. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. I heard the window open and the noise got louder and louder, so I opened my eyes very carefully, and I saw a very tall, dark figure with no eyes, no nose or mouth. It was just a black silhouette. I couldn't see any facial features. It was just a black shadow of a human standing at the foot of my bed. I was terrified. I tried to wake up my brother, but he wouldn't budge. So I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then, I tried to reach for the lamp by my bed, but it wouldn't move. So I tried to get out of bed, but I could not move my arms or legs. I was frozen in place. The figure walked over to me, sat on my bed, and just stared at me. I was paralyzed in a deep nightmare. At least, that's how I felt. I eventually fell asleep. A couple hours later, I wake up to a noise and a heavy weight on my chest. I tried to turn, but I couldn't move. I then heard a voice say, "You will come with us," and I could not speak or move. I lay there and prayed to God to help me. I fell back asleep. I woke up a couple of hours later and told my brother about the figure. He just laughed at me, saying I was just dreaming, and that it could not be real. I tried to convince him what had happened to me was not a dream, but I don't know what to think. Did I just have some crazy nightmare? I can't shake the feeling that something evil was truly in our cabin. Before I was a ranger and hiking up in the mountains of Colorado, I was on a raft guide on the Colorado River in the summer of 1983. I worked at the state park in the canyon, and in the fall, I worked at the state park on the lake. The summer of '83 was particularly dry. We had the first fire ban in all of Colorado history, and the firewood supply was exhausted. We were rationed to 2 pieces of firewood per person per night. One day, I was taking a group of people on a rafting trip. One of the people was a park ranger from Denver. We heard a bear that was hanging around the campground, so we decided to take a group downriver to the campground to spend the night. We ran the whole day without a break, and when we arrived at the campground, we were exhausted. The ranger went with one of the groups to set up camp. while I went with the other group to do the same. This is when all hell broke loose, and we encountered what I can only describe as a Bigfoot-like being. We arrived at camp, and the ranger that was with them was nowhere to be found. I assumed he was just busy setting up camp. Although we did set up camp and night fell, and everybody ended up asleep. I was awakened by a commotion. When I opened my eyes and poked my head at my tent, I see this gigantic man-like shape standing in camp. It looked to be about 8 feet tall, covered in dark, thick hair, and it was right next to somebody else's tent in the camp. I jump up and freak out. "Hey!" This thing turns around and looks at me. It has eyes like a black bear. It was standing on 2 legs and was kind of looking up in the air. I guess I must have scared it. It turned around and ran downriver and disappeared quickly in the brush. I ran over to the tent, and it just so happened the ranger from earlier was sleeping in it. I yelled, "Hey!" He jumped out of his tent and appeared very shaken up. I asked him, what in the world is going on? He told me to get everybody out of there. I told him to calm down and asked him what he saw. He told me he was awakened by a big noise, and when he looked at his tent, he saw this Bigfoot creature looking at him. He had been awakened for a little while, just terrified of that thing looking into his tent. He pulled out his gun and told us we should go looking for it, to kill it. I told him, look, we're all exhausted. It would be better to just head home in the morning. Well, eventually, the next day, when we all get back to the ranger station, he told everybody there we had a Bigfoot sighting. He told them that he was scared and could not sleep. The ranger station was about 3 miles away from campground. I thought it was kind of strange, and not only did I never see that ranger again, but I always wondered if he went back out there to look for that thing. What I always thought was weird too was that he was not afraid of ridicule at this time from his fellow rangers. You gotta remember, in the 80s, Bigfoot was still kind of in the loopy bin. If you saw one, you were probably drunk, high, or off your rocker. But not him though. He flat out and boldly told anybody that he saw the creature that looked like a Bigfoot. And guess what? Nobody really laughed at him. Still very strange to me to this day. This happened when I was younger, probably 10 years old or so. I was with my family, and we were on a hike when we came across this old train. Naturally, I was curious and wanted to climb on it. My dad told me it was unsafe and told me to stay on the ground. I was disappointed, but I listened. We started walking away. I looked back to see if anybody else was interested in checking it out with me. My dad now was about 100 feet ahead of me, since I was kind of dragging my feet. But I saw a figure boarding the train. So I stood there for a minute and then realized that I was the last one standing there. I was scared. My dad was far enough away now that I was sure the figure was not him. Of course, there's no way it could have been. And it was acting a little hostile. I decided that the best thing to do was to run. This figure that stepped in the train now stepped out, and I could tell it looked like a man, but was really tall and appeared naked. So I ran as fast as I could back to my dad, and I didn't want to talk about the train. I'm not sure if anybody else around on the trail saw it, but I can't forget it. I've always wondered what that train car was doing there. It was this old, rusty, dilapidated, beat-down train car, kind of just dumped off in the middle of the woods, not too far off the trail, just for your FYI. We had a park ranger officer stop us down the ways, ask us what we were doing, and we told him what we had found. He just looked at us strangely and explained to us there was no old abandoned train back that way, and then spent the next 5 minutes convincing us we were wrong. I really don't know what to make of it, but wow, it was so strange. The most interesting thing I've ever seen when I was working as a ranger up in the mountains and came across this large cavern. I was off duty at the time, but that was my current career. I had to rappel down it to take a look. When I was down into it, I saw these weird markings on the wall. I tried to take a picture with my flashlight, but my flash would not work. I had to go up to get a better flashlight. When I took the picture, well, it appeared to be a figure in the center of the cavern. I was never able to fully prove this on photo, but I'm pretty sure the cave drawings were not done by natives. I also think that the whole area should be investigated by anthropologists. It's possible that I was able to see remnants of some sort of ancient civilization. The cave opened up into a massive chamber. It was possible for somebody to even seek shelter in there. I also think the whole area should have been investigated for potential sites. The figure in the center, carved out of a wall, was holding a spear. The spear was pointing towards, well, the entrance of the cave. I think that it's possible someone was trying to warn me not to come down there. It's a scary thought, but upon closer inspection, the figure was actually carved out of lava rock. Loose details, but still a man with a spear. The figure was carved into the wall, and there was no evidence that it had been moved at any time or way. There were 2 walls with cave drawings on them. There was a 3rd wall without drawings on it. This was the wall of the figure that was carved into it. Maybe not exactly scary, but more mysterious and very interesting. My husband and I were on a trip to Mount Rushmore in Yellowstone. We were currently in the process of stopping in Cody, Wyoming on our way home. This is where Yellowstone National Park is. There's a cute little town with shops and restaurants. It is only a short drive to the park. While we were looking at the shops, I noticed a man in ranger-type clothing. I'm not sure if this was a park ranger or not at the time, but I thought it was odd that he was wearing ranger clothing while in town. I mentioned this to my husband, just because it was weird. We continued shopping. Later in the day, I see this man again. This time, though, in the Walmart parking lot. He was just standing there by his truck. I remember that he was wearing the same clothing. That's how I identified him. He appeared to be watching people as they came into the parking lot. I told my husband again. He just said, well, he is probably just wearing the uniform because either he's off duty or maybe it is authentic and he likes wearing it. And I just kind of dismissed the thought. After we finished shopping for some groceries, we were walking to the car. I noticed him again. He was now standing in front of his truck, and he was watching people, just like before. I don't know why, but you know how your gut just tells you certain things about certain people? Yeah, that's what my gut was doing to this guy. And now I was beginning to get a little nervous. I said to my husband, I really don't like the way this man is acting. He's really watching people intently. My husband is like, well, he's probably just doing his job, hon. So we get in the car and we're driving off. As we're pulling out, he just stares at us, watching us drive off. I looked back and been like, well, he's watching people weirdly. My husband asked me, what does that mean? What do you mean he's watching people weirdly? And so I was like, I don't know. I have a feeling, okay? So a couple of days pass and we go to check in for our room at a hotel near the park. Well, I noticed that man again is standing there in the lobby. I don't know if he was watching us or what, but he was looking at the board. And I say to my husband, there's that man again. I don't like him and I don't trust him. Just as my husband starts to say something, the park ranger turns to look at us directly in the eyes, like he knew we were talking about him. I almost gasped audibly. His eyes weren't normal. They were like a snake's. Reptilian. They were slits. Within a half second, they changed back to regular eyes, like a person has, and he just wore this angry expression on his face before turning back to doing whatever he was doing. So, we nope it out of there. Well, again, the next day we're on our way to the park, and we see him again. We're driving on the main road in town, and he is just walking. He sees us, stops, and blatantly begins waving at us. He's again wearing the same uniform. It's clearly the same man. Nobody else is walking around town in the same park ranger uniform, and he is standing right next to a tourist shopping area. As he is watching us, we're driving off. He again had this angry expression on his face. So we get to the park and are walking to the lodge. As we're walking, I see him again. This is later in the evening, mind you. I know he's following us. The man was standing there, watching us very intently. Just us, nobody else. He was wearing a ranger hat this time, unlike other times, and even had his vest on. He still had that angry look on his face and kind of a smirk. He turned away quickly and walked into a small little gift shop. This is where the story turns. I don't want to give anything away, but this is a creepy story. After he went in there, my husband and I went into the lodge to get a cup of coffee. We were going to meet my in-laws for dinner, and while we were in the lodge, I noticed the man standing there by the door, staring at us again. He was again wearing the same clothes, so there's no mistaking him. A man sitting at the table next to us looked over and said, "See that man there? Don't trust him. He's not really a ranger. He's very dangerous, and from the looks of it, he's been scouting you two out." The fact that a mere stranger would point that out to us, without even knowing who we were or our situation, was undoubtedly terrifying. We just got up and left right there. I think we had a short phone call with the in-laws about not being able to meet up, but we felt like our lives were at stake. We booked it out of town shortly thereafter. Last summer, I was out with a friend who was driving around. We were out near the end of a road in Big Bend National Park. So I asked, "Where do you think we are exactly?" And he just told me he has no idea. There were no landmarks, and we looked out into the distance, only to see sky and trees ahead of us. He says, "I sure hope we're somewhere because I don't want to be lost. I'm sure we're somewhere though. This is road after all, and we got a destination." So I told him, I don't want to be a pessimist, but he kept pressing on. "I know where we're going. You don't have to worry. We're going to a place that's by the Colorado River. They have everything we need." So a little while later, we see this car coming toward us. The driver was a park ranger. And I'm like, "Look, we found somebody. Now we can get directions." So we kind of flag him down and pull over. And the ranger quickly pulls over his truck. Fast, as if he's on a mission or in a panic. He kind of races out of his truck, and he has a very concerned look on his face. He begins kind of interrupting us and asks us nervously what we're doing, where we're going. We tell him. As we're telling him, he cuts us off mid-sentence and just tells us it's not safe. We need to get out of here. Extremely confused, we start asking him what he's talking about. He was patrolling this road a few hours ago and saw a man die out here. What? We had asked him. He tells us there's a large unknown canine that had just mauled a man to death not too long ago. That's the second body that's been found mauled to death in the last couple of months. He went on to say there's been a recent increase of sightings of this animal, which has been confirmed to be a very large canine of some kind. We kind of just nod stupidly. I mean, not really sure what to say or how to react, and he's already getting back in his truck at this point, trying to get out of there. He gets back in his truck, waves us, and drives off. So we're still looking at each other like, did that just happen? And right as we get back in the car, before the engine even gets turned on, we both get this really weird feeling come over us. It was a feeling of imminent danger, like neither of us were safe, like we needed to leave now. I looked at my friend and was like, "You need to start the car right now, and we need to go." We got out of there and haven't talked about that day or time since. I do think about it from time to time, and it was very weird. I don't know what to make of it. I'm just glad we didn't end up getting killed or eaten. It was a hot summer day, and I had gone to visit the Cave of Three Lovers in the morning. I was walking on the trail from the cave to the back of the park when I heard a park ranger reporting to somebody that a large bear was on the loose, and that, apparently, it was dangerous at that point to be on the trails. I got really worried because, well, I was alone. But I had to go by the ranger station to get to the trailhead to get back to my car. I had to finish my hike. I was pretty nervous and decided to go back to the cave where there were other people. I told another hiker that I was worried about the bear, and he assured me it would be fine. I decided to take his word for it and keep going. I wasn't equipped with anything like I should have been. Bear mace would have been the most optimum. I was so worried that I didn't take a picture of the back of the park, which is pretty amazing. Very photogenic. I was going through the trail, and I saw it. A bear. It was huge, and it was standing in the middle of the trail. It was black, and it turned to me and began snarling. It was scary, and I wanted to run. But as I got a closer look, and the more I realized, it wasn't actually a bear at all, but a short, stocky wolf, all black, long pointed tipped ears and a very long snout. I wasn't even sure what to make of it or how to process it. This thing, then, starts letting out this awful scream that sounded like a woman being murdered, with a mix of a wolf howling. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I started walking backwards, and this thing starts walking towards me. So I turned around and started running, and it began chasing me. I felt I had this thing caught up to me. It would have killed me. I jumped in the brush next to me to try and avoid it. I kept running, even though I could hear it running after me. I got to the parking lot and ran to my car. I had to climb the fence. I had to turn around and see if it was following me. It was. I climbed the fence and I was over it, and I was now running to the car. I was so scared I was crying. I didn't know what to do. So I get in my car and I lock the doors. Now I'm shaking and scared. I turned my car on and it was making this grinding noise. I screamed. I thought this thing was going to get in the car and get me. I started going down the road, and this thing was running along the fence. I kept going, and I looked in my rearview mirror to see if it was still there. Oh, I saw the thing. It was still running, but it was slowly coming to a stop. It was still looking at me. I was scared. I almost didn't want to look. Then, it kind of fell on the ground, throwing its head back and forth, convulsing strangely and then jumping back up to run off away into the woods. I cried harder because I was so scared and grateful that I wasn't dead. Being a 23-year-old girl, I feel like I wouldn't have been strong enough to keep that thing back from me. I'm glad I survived. I usually am an adventure seeker, but after this, I will be going less off the beaten path. I've never been more scared than I ever was on this hike. Ever. I worked in a large park as a ranger in Pennsylvania. Believe it or not, we rangers have some pretty harrowing ghost tales while out on the job. I worked at a park called Laurel Hill State Park in Somerset County. This park was easily one of the most haunted in the state, and I've had my fair share of horrible experiences. I'll tell you some of them. I was sitting in the office one night when I heard somebody knock on the door. I went to the door and looked out the peephole, but I saw nobody out there. I opened the door, walked around, saw no one. I went back to the office and sat at my desk. I had my back to the door, and I knew it was closed. I heard the door open, and I felt a cold draft coming in. I turned around to see if somebody had opened the door, and I jumped when I saw nobody in the doorway. I sat there for a while and I heard the door close. I felt the chill again. I then went to the door and felt the doorknob. It was icy cold, so I stood there, scared, when I heard a distinct voice in my ear saying, "Let me in." It was a child's voice. I was scared that it must have been a ghost. I ignored it, but I kept hearing it, faintly, "Let me in." And finally, I yelled at it to leave me alone, and it eventually stopped. I went back to my desk and sat there for a while, and then I heard it again. It just kept repeating the same thing. Another time, when I was patrolling out at night, I saw this white ghastly figure come strolling across the clearing in front of me. It was about 9 or 10 p.m. I ran back to the car vehicle and got my radio, told dispatch that I had sighted something. She talked me through it, told me to stay calm and keep my distance. I was only about 20 yards from it. I hit the button on my radio, told dispatch that I was going to get close to it. I started walking toward it, and it was walking toward me. I raised my rifle up and stopped at about 5 yards. It had no face. It was just a white shape. I thought it was a human at first, but I backed up and it kept coming. I hit the button on my radio and told dispatch that it was going to come in contact with me. I was scared. This thing was scary looking, and now I could see the details of its face, or lack thereof. It had no eyes and no mouth, no nose or ears, but it did have these faint black holes and outlines for where those features should have been. I was terrified, and thought that I should shoot at it, but I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. As I'm finishing that thought, it all of a sudden just vanishes, evaporates like water. Another time, I was patrolling inside of the parks in the woods. I was looking around an old abandoned barn. We would sometimes use it for storage for junk that we found lying around. I was looking inside and I heard a noise come from the rafters. It sounded like a child crying. I looked up and saw nothing. I waited and I heard the crying again. It sounded as if it was coming up on the rafters yet a second time. So, I walked to the back of the barn and looked up. I could not see anything. I walked back to the front of the barn, heard it again. So, desperate, I gazed up this time with my flashlight, and I see a white face staring down at me. I froze for a second. It was a wide-eyed child. It was like a child from the horror movies, and its eyes were just white. I hit the radio button and told dispatch that I saw a face in the rafters. I took off after that. When I was driving out, I decided to turn around and go back to the barn. Then I see these black shapes that seem to mold to the darkness around them, going in and out of the barn. That was a night that I'll never forget. Like I said, I've seen some really spooky stuff out here, just working as a ranger. There are more things in the woods that us rangers deal with than just Bigfoot and missing persons.